We're back with another episode of Bitfinex Talks. I'm your host, Ricardo Martinez. Today, my guest is Mark, who is the co-founder of Aether. Aether is an AI crypto project that is using the blockchain to harness GPU power for artificial intelligence computing needs. Mark, how are you today? Thank you for coming on the show.
Hey, man. I'm good. Thank you for having me, Ricardo. Pleasure to be here.
Mark, for the first question of the interview, for people that aren't familiar with Aether, can you kind of give us a high-level overview of what you guys are trying to accomplish with the project?
For sure. I think often the best way to understand what Aether does is to take a little bit of a look at the problem first, right? I think that gives you really good context to why we do what we do and what we're doing. So I guess the easiest way to start is to reflect on something that I think a lot of people in the audience have probably heard, right? And that is that there is this global enterprise GPU scarcity, right? It's really, really difficult for startups and small to medium-sized tech companies to get access to critical GPU resources, particularly those that are building in the AI space.
Now,
right?
when you say GPU, you mean like industrial GPUs or like the 4060 that I have in my laptop?
I mean enterprise grade GPUs.
Okay.
Right. And that's a really good distinction that I'll talk to a little bit later on, because one thing that makes Aether different is we're 100% enterprise grade. Right. So remind me to talk about that if I forget. But getting back to the scarcity issue, you've probably seen people like Elon Musk come out and say things like, GPUs are harder to buy than drugs, right? You might have seen Zuckerberg come out. He went and purchased just under $11 billion worth of the kind of top end enterprise grade NVIDIA GPUs, the H100s, right? It's increasingly difficult for startups and small to medium sized tech companies to access these resources, right? At Aether, we look at that challenge in four kind of distinct ways. Right. So first of all, there is buy pressure, right? Of course, the market is experiencing massive buy pressure. You have companies like OpenAI, right? Anthropic, Microsoft, Google, Meta, purchasing massive amounts of these GPUs. That buy pressure means that there's less of these compute chips out there for other companies to access, right? Secondly, you have NVIDIA. They can only produce so many of these chips per year, and there's not enough of those chips out there. There's not enough supply to meet all of this massive compute demand. Thirdly, and this is a little bit specific to the AI sector in particular, you've probably heard of an acronym LLM, right? It stands for Large Language Model. ChatGPT 4, for example, or 4.0, right, is a large language model. ChatGPT 3.5 was an earlier version of that language model, right? What we're seeing is that every iteration, every kind of newer AI model that's released is actually exponentially more expensive to train from a compute and a data perspective than its predecessor, right? So as these models are getting more sophisticated, it's costing exponentially more compute to train them. But within that same period, right? So from when we went from ChatGPT 3 to like ChatGPT 4, we had an exponential increase in how much it costs to train, but we didn't have an exponential rise in how much compute we have access to, right? So there's this like growing gap between supply and, again, the requirements of these more advanced models every time we kind of step up their complexity, right? And then finally, maybe most relevant to Aether is the fact that when you look at enterprise GPUs on kind of a global scale, they're actually a really poorly managed resource, right? We took some data from data centers in the US, right? And the data showed that actually over 80% of enterprise grade GPUs are sitting idle at any one time, right? Only 15 to 18% of enterprise grade GPUs are in full utilization. The rest of them are predominantly under optimized. And this kind of gave us a really good idea, right? Effectively, we said, okay, there's scarcity here, but there's also this incredibly underutilized resource. If we could establish this infrastructure layer, right, that allowed us to connect all of those underutilized resources and surface them in a way that we could then connect them to this kind of global compute demand, right? That would be meaningful supply that we could pull onto the market. And then, of course, by being a DPIN and not owning all of the equipment ourselves, we have totally separate unit economics from very centralized cloud solutions, and we can provide that compute then at really, really competitive prices, right? So that's effectively what Aether does. We're a enterprise-grade GPU compute marketplace, effectively, right? Where data centers, tech companies, enterprises, even kind of crypto mining organizations can connect and contribute their GPU resources, often idle GPU resources, and then they can earn rewards for doing work in our ecosystem. And on the flip side of that, all of these companies that are looking to build in the AI space or in the gaming space, because they're obviously dependent on GPUs as well, they can kind of tap into this totally new supply and access compute at, often significantly reduced prices.
Mark, maybe you can explain this to me, because I'm not as much of an expert on the GPU market as you are. Why is there such a supply side bottleneck for these chips and the GPUs?
Yeah, this is an interesting question, right? So it really goes to, I guess, first of all, getting a little bit AI focused, right? It goes to the architecture of the models themselves, right? So in around 2017, this new model architecture was proposed, right? It was called a transformer model architecture, right?
Okay.
And this transformer model architecture effectively meant that models could be trained on large amounts of data much, much quicker, right? Because transformer-based models could read large amounts of data all at once. Previous versions, previous model architectures had to read kind of words one by one almost. So they would read data in the way that you or I would read a book, whereas transformers could process huge amounts of data in parallel kind of all at once, right? What happened when that model architecture was proposed was that this alignment, this really great compatibility between the type of compute that a GPU can do, right, and the type of processing that a transformer-based model requires became really apparent, right? GPUs just became almost overnight the most efficient way to train AI, right?
Okay.
Now, this is kind of the link between GPUs and AI, right? Now, what was interesting, however, and maybe somewhat unexpected, was the impact of how those models, the impact of how adding more GPUs to that equation made the model train faster, right? It was a really kind of linear relationship. Like if you add more GPUs, it literally just gets smarter quicker, right? So all of a sudden you had this situation where it was a very easy kind of 1 + 1 = 2. This is how I win the AI race, right? And no one, there's probably never been a more important race to win in human history, right? The company or the country or the organization that has access to the most powerful AI will literally win everything, right? And all they need to do is have the most GPUs, right? All they need to do is have access to a bunch of data and the most GPUs. So effectively, you have this insatiable appetite, right? If you have the money and you're one of these big companies, you will spend every single dollar you can accessing compute. So much so that things that shouldn't conceivably be a bottleneck, like global power supply, are actually becoming potential bottlenecks for how much compute we can deliver, right? So it's not that NVIDIA can't produce a whole bunch of chips, like they can, right? They're one of the kind of most well-oiled machines in the world, right? They can just pump these things out. But the value of winning the race is so high, and the way that you win the race is so simple in some ways that it means that there is just this kind of ridiculous amount of buy pressure, because it's as simple as, if I have more access to this compute, I can potentially win this race. And if I win this race, I win the world.
Okay. Thank you for that explanation. I guess my next question would be, you mentioned that they're poorly managed resources, these GPUs that they're using to accomplish these things. Why are they poorly managed? Like, why aren't they using these machines 100% of the time rather than 18% of the time, or whatever number you said it was?
Yeah. So great question, right? So first of all, I think what people sometimes forget, right, is that yes, big tech companies buy a huge amount of this compute, like Meta, OpenAI, all of these companies. Also, companies like AWS, they buy a huge amount of this compute. AWS, Google Cloud, and of course, when AWS or Google Cloud or Microsoft Azure, when they buy the compute, it sits in their data centers and they rent it out to other people, right? And other people go and they get their compute from them. So people think, oh, these are the resources that you're talking about when they talk about kind of underutilized resources. I'm not talking about those resources. What you have to remember is that a huge amount of compute infrastructure is also bought by companies that buy the compute for themselves, right? So they buy it and they don't have any infrastructure to expose that compute to other companies, right? They buy it, and if they don't manage it 100% of the time, right, that is just an expense that's burning a hole in their pocket, right? Because this is some of the most expensive infrastructure ever created. Definitely the most expensive kind of GPU compute infrastructure, right? The average H100 server is somewhere in the region of 300,000 US dollars, and the bandwidth cost and the electricity cost and the rack rental space cost for having this this server live is through the roof, right? So these companies, they'll buy it, they'll sit there, and maybe they forecast wrong, right? Maybe they're so worried that they're going to get kind of their supply pulled by a competitor. Maybe they're really worried that it's going to be more difficult to buy later on once they have a better idea of their forecast. Maybe their production side gets delayed, and all of these kind of LLM runs that they planned on running earlier, they're now having to delay and run later. There's a whole bunch of reasons why forecasting compute is a really difficult thing to do. But the main challenge, I guess, that these guys have to kind of deal with is the fact that if you're buying your own compute, and a lot of companies do make that choice, if you're buying your own compute, you need to make a decision on how much you want to buy pretty early, right? Because you don't want to be buying a small amount because you only need a small amount today, right? And then not being able to scale up your production a little bit later on, right? In 6 months, we need a little bit more compute, right? So a lot of the time, they'll buy what they know they'll need in the future, and they'll just kind of have to deal internally with the fact that this is going to be something that, 50% or 80% of the capacity that they have is not going to be utilized because they don't need it yet. So this is something that would be quite familiar to most people in the tech industry that have dealt with kind of purchasing or managing their own compute before. But I think it's a bigger problem than ever because of the FOMO around AI, right? And because of the scarcity of the compute, right, as a physical resource, right? So I think never before has there been this much pressure to be in the race, and never before has it been this difficult to get access to this hardware, and never before has it been this expensive, right? So it's a very, very difficult to manage situation for a lot of companies.
Okay, we understand the problem now. How does Aether come in and help mitigate these issues and help solve the problem?
Yeah, so we make it really, really simple, right? We have an infrastructure layer, right? And if you're a big tech company and you have a whole bunch of compute and you want to de-risk your balance sheet, right? You want to say, okay, right now, 50% of our compute is sitting idle. It's costing me this much per month, right? Oh, here's Aether, right? It's very simple, takes me 15 minutes. I can connect my hardware up to Aether's ecosystem, and Aether will link me up to compute demand, right? And then I'll earn rewards, not just for that compute demand, but you'll actually earn rewards for even having your equipment sit idle in our network, right? So literally after 15 minutes, you can have your compute plugged into our network, earning rewards, and essentially removing that that burn from your balance sheet in a way that's really, really valuable for big tech companies, for anyone that has this expensive compute sitting on their infrastructure. And then on the other side, right, we have a platform that is, again, really, really familiar to anyone that's bought compute, right? You go online, you look for the region that you want the compute in, you look for the available compute in that region, you look by GPU, you look by all of the different specifications that are important for your project, right? And you simply go and purchase that compute. And we make it, again, very developer friendly, very customer friendly. We have some of the friendliest contract terms in the space, alongside obviously really, really competitive pricing that is, anywhere from 60 to 80% cheaper than what you'll see at say the hyperscalers, for example.
What role does the ATH token play? I know you said that people will earn it as rewards, but are there other utilities for the token within the ecosystem?
Yeah, so if you're a compute provider, right, 15 minutes essentially to upload your compute onto the network. To activate your compute in the network, you have to stake the token, right? That's so that you've got a bit of skin in the game, right? It's to stop bad actors coming in and effectively kind of maybe trying to spoof GPUs, for example, say there's something that they're not, right? If you do or are caught as a bad actor in the network, you can get slashed. So staking tokens are a good kind of defense mechanism for the ecosystem. So we do have that utility for the token. On the buy side, when you're coming into our network and you're getting onto our platform and you're looking to purchase compute, what you'll have to do is you'll have to purchase the token first, and the token is used to purchase the compute, right? And then, of course, you have the Aether treasury, right, which is responsible for executing on the smart contracts that deliver rewards to everyone that's kind of acting in the ecosystem, right? So if you're operating one of our checker nodes, right, and you're conducting these checks that are really valuable and important for the network, when you conduct those checks, you'll be able to earn rewards, right? So you'll be rewarded by a smart contract in the network. So it is a very kind of efficient and well-managed and often autonomous kind of distribution mechanism. But the token provides a lot of value in all of those different kind of spaces, whether you're on the buy side or the contribution side. It has a lot of purpose.
You mentioned AI being like the primary driver for this demand for the compute power, but you also mentioned something about cryptocurrency miners. Like, are you also seeing miners compete for this GPU power?
Well, I mean, to be fair, anyone that has a use case for compute can come onto our network and purchase that compute, right? So say, for example, we have partnerships with a couple of different like node as a service operators, right?
Okay.
That plug into deep-in networks like Aether, and they allow you through their third-party platform to kind of spin up nodes really quickly and then deploy those nodes into like BitTensor, for example, right? Or Morpheus, right? So definitely, if an ecosystem out there is pumping, right, and some of the compute in our network is useful to people that want to mine compute in those networks, then definitely you can come to Aether, you can access and maybe rent like a 4090 from the cloud or an A100 or an H100 from the cloud, and you can deploy that into like BitTensor, for example, and you could earn tau. 100%. I think that is going to be something that is an increasingly big sector of business for us, particularly as this decentralized AI narrative picks up with projects like BitTensor and Morpheus and Venice and other really interesting ecosystems in the decentralized AI space start to kind of expand. So for sure, that's definitely possible. We also kind of just speaking broadly about the kind of the mining ecosystem, we have our own mining device, like a physical mining device, which is very, very cool. It's called the Aethir Edge, right? So users can come, they can purchase the Aethir Edge. The Aethir Edge will go and sit in your home. You plug it into your power outlet, you plug it into your Wi-Fi, and it will passively exist as a node within the Aether ecosystem. And we can actually push enterprise-grade workloads out onto that node, and it will do really, really cool kind of AI tasks for our network, and then send those tasks back to our ecosystem, and then earn rewards for the owner of that node, right? That device is obviously a home kind of mining device, but we partnered with Qualcomm, right? And it has their latest AI chip in it, which means it's really, really suitable for enterprise compute workloads. And we have a whole bunch of kind of really cool inferencing tasks and other kind of smaller scale AI workloads that we can't wait to kind of deploy out to this Aether Edge node ecosystem. So if you wanted to directly kind of mine the Aether ecosystem itself, yes, you could do that too with the Aether Edge.
What are there any other use cases, like any other industries or anything that are competing for this GPU compute power?
Yeah, for sure. I think I wouldn't say competing, right? But we have effectively three primary compute streams, right? First is AI. And when you think about AI, there's kind of two streams there. There's training, right? Training is when you're taking, for example, ChatGPT 3 to ChatGPT 4. You're training the model. It's getting more sophisticated. You need GPUs to make AI smarter, right? The other side of the stream with AI is called inferencing. And that's where that's AI doing its job, right? So when you ask ChatGPT a question and it goes and it queries its model and it gives you an answer, right? That's called inferencing. Both of those tasks require GPUs. I wouldn't say they're competing. Maybe they are, right? But it's all part of the AI ecosystem. So all of the compute that services AI is servicing it either on the training or the compute side. The second type of compute that we deliver is actually gaming compute, right?
Okay.
So we have a massive amount, somewhere in the region of 35,000 plus enterprise-grade gaming GPUs that are there to support Aether's cloud gaming infrastructure, right? So for the viewers that maybe aren't aware of what cloud gaming is where you install a game onto a cloud, right, or into the cloud, and then you stream that game to a user so that you can effectively play any game, right, on any device. Because all of the compute power, everything that you need like a gaming PC for or a high-end phone for, that's all being dealt with in the cloud. And all you need to do is, tap the screen and play or kind of, get your mouse and keyboard connected, right? It's a super, super cool thing, a super cool piece of tech that removes the requirement for a user to have good hardware, right? And if you look at the gaming ecosystem as a whole, there's 3.3 billion gamers out there. 2.8 billion of them are gaming on low-end devices. That means they can't play Call of Duty, right? They can't play Diablo 4. They can't play PUBG, right? Because their devices are kind of low-end, like they're low spec. But with Aether's infrastructure, right, we can scale. Well, first of all, we can scale our infrastructure everywhere, right? So our infrastructure is in Southeast Asia, it's in Latin America, it's in Europe, it's in the US, right? And that infrastructure allows us to deliver this kind of cloud gaming technology to anyone in those regions. So for the first time, the entire gaming population in Vietnam, right, will have access to any game on any device because Aether's infrastructure is there, and that's huge, right? And that's all GPU infrastructure, just like AI, but it's different types of GPUs. It's not the exact same GPU. So when I say that we've got kind of different kind of product lines, right? They're both GPUs, but they're different types of GPUs, so they don't compete. Maybe the internal BD teams within Aether compete, right? For who's going to be like the kind of the most powerful revenue generating team within the business. But the GPU compute itself doesn't necessarily compete.
As someone that's plugged into like the AI world and also the cryptocurrency worlds, do you have any predictions like on the future integration between AI and crypto?
Yeah, I think the integration is only going to get stronger, right? I think there is such a natural synergy between AI and crypto. I think there's synergy in the disruption that crypto can provide, right? I think networks like Aether, right, giving more people, giving more companies, giving more builders access to a critical piece of what it takes to start an AI company, right? That compute, that's huge, right? We're giving lifeblood, we're giving fuel to companies that might not be able to build in the AI space without us, right? Because those resources are unavailable through these, traditional centralized channels. So I think there's really great alignment from kind of a disruption perspective there. Alongside that, I think decentralized AI is a huge narrative, right? I think you're only going to be able to build competitors or potential competitors to these big established AI companies like OpenAI if you combine resources in a way that the blockchain does so well, right? The blockchain allows us to kind of create these massive compute networks, not necessarily on the physical side. In this sense, I'm more talking about how, something like BitTensor allows you to kind of align on a broader compute objective, right? You can do distributed things in very interesting ways from a compute or I guess a machine learning side, I should say, right? So I think that's really cool. And then finally, another one is just AI agents, right? I think we're going to see a massive exponential increase in the type of work that's offloaded to agents as they become more and more capable, right? And one of the first and most important things that I think will offload to agents is the ability to transact, right? So digital actors will require digital money. And I think that there's just a huge amount of, again, synergy between the utility that we expect AI agents to have and the payment rails and the infrastructure that we built for payments in crypto, right? Because like, imagine you had an agent that was kind of just had free reign to do everything and it had access to your bank and it went kind of off the rails, right? You could make an argument that it would be much harder to track than something that was sitting on the blockchain that you could see and understand its movements and its behavior on. And I think there's a lot that's going to be built in the AI agent space that will benefit from what we have here in crypto. So overall, crypto and AI alignment makes a huge amount of sense to me.
Earlier, you mentioned a couple other crypto AI projects like BitTensor and Morpheus. Like, what kind of synergies are there for Aether and these other projects?
Yeah, so synergy with other projects.
Yeah,
a lot of synergy, right? So people look at IO.net, which is technically a competitor of ours. Actually, the vast majority of enterprise compute sitting on IO was actually provided by Aether, right? So our enterprise infrastructure is actually very persistent across the majority of AI projects within the Web3 space. And that's the way we want it, right? We don't want to be seen as competitive, right, with others. We really want to be seen as someone that's there to help people build, right? So we have compute that we've provided to BitTensor, for example. Morpheus just recently opened the ability to provide compute to their network, so we're very much hoping to collaborate and provide compute to them. We're working alongside, some of the smartest builders from an LLM and an AI agent perspective within the Web3 space. We're powering a really cool AI agent, AI chatbot company called Momate, right? Which has around 2 million users and an incredible sort of chatbot ecosystem. So yeah, Aether is very persistent, very present in the AI sector and Web3. And I think that if you can name a big AI project out there, Aether's supporting them somehow.
My last question is, how can people keep tabs on what Aether's doing? Can you give the social media networks? How can people follow you on social media if they're interested? Can you give us that kind of information, please?
Yeah, for sure. So I would say, first of all, head to Twitter, right? Our main account, the main corporate account is at Aether Cloud, right? So feel free to follow that. That's probably the best place for all things information related to Aether. If you're looking for maybe more of an inside look, more of a founder's perspective, feel free to follow me, Mr. Rydon, so like Mr. Rydon, Mrrydon. That's my Twitter handle. Feel free to follow me there. Again, just a slightly different perspective than what you'll see from the main account, maybe a little bit more AI flavor, because that's really kind of where I tend to lean. But we also have our Discord. I can't remember what the Discord channel is off the top of my head, but it's the biggest Aether related one in the space. But definitely follow us on Twitter. That would be where I would send most people.
Okay, thanks. And then is there anything that I didn't ask that you feel is important for the audience to know about Aether?
I think we just mentioned in the very beginning that I'd come back to the fact that Aether is enterprise grade. So one thing that I'll just share about that is that when people think about compute projects in the DePIN space, often what people think is that Aether is a collection of gamers who have contributed their GPUs to our network. That's actually not the case. We don't aggregate any consumer equipment. So there's no individuals out there at all, not a single one, right, who are contributing their GPU to our network. And the reason for that is that it's really, really hard to take compute or take GPUs that are contributed by an individual, right, and then sell them to a big company. Because the big company is going to come to you, they're going to say, oh, how can you guarantee that Ricardo's not just going to turn his GPU off at night, right? How can you guarantee that Ricardo's not just going to watch YouTube and his bandwidth is going to throttle and we're not going to be able to pull any compute out of his network, right? You get to a situation very, very quickly if you rely on consumer GPUs where you can't really sell it, right? So we chose not to go that path. 100% of Aether's GPUs are sitting in data centers or connected to enterprise-grade network infrastructure. There's 43,000 GPUs in our system, and every single one of them is sitting and capable of serving any enterprise customer you can point to, right? Whether it's OpenAI or a massive gaming enterprise, every single piece of GPU, every single piece of equipment within our network is enterprise ready. And that is extremely unique in the crypto space. We're the only fully enterprise grade compute DePIN. And that's a massive, massive differentiator, right? When you think about the utility and power of our network, it's why we have such insane revenues compared to anyone else in the space. And it's also why, for those of you that do know a little bit about AI and the power of H100s, it's why we have, the largest H100 infrastructure stack in Web3. We have over 4,000 of these GPUs connected to our network. We put 1,000 of them in IO.net. And we have, I think something like 10 times the nearest biggest competitor when it comes to H100. So just wanted to make that point before we wrap up.
Sounds like a pretty important distinction. I think a lot of other projects that have tried to harness GPU power were kind of more consumer facing rather than enterprise facing, correct?
100%.
Yeah. All right. Well, Mark, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come on the show and tell us all about Aether. It was a blast.
No worries. Thank you again for having me. It's been a pleasure.